966.
This is the 966 episode 95. Hello, Richard Wilson. How are you?
Excellent. Lucien Ziegler, how are you? Excellent.
I'm doing well. Staying cool here on a globally very hot day and week. Looks like you're staying cool as well. The AC looks like it's pumping over there.
You know, I actually mentioned at some time, at least once every day, like feel so fortunate to have a home in AC and to be able to achieve, maintain some sort of comfort and really health, safety. I mean, this is really, really brutal. And if you're out in this, it's just globally, it's dangerous.
Yeah, Richard, we will be talking a little bit about the global heat wave going on in today's episode. We've got a really great show. We are guest-less this week, Richard, and then we'll be back with a very steady stream of guests throughout the summer. So a little bit of a breather here, and it's just you, just the 966 boys this week.
Just us. You
us.
You can either get fired up or, turn us off.
That's right. That's right. There is no forced listening or viewing, but it is cool to see the audience grow. Richard, we mention it frequently, but we were just talking about it right before the show started. It is nice to see these numbers continue to grow. So it's cool that the 966 fam continues to expand globally. Richard, comments, good ones this week. This one from Trimex on YouTube. He says, quote, I think they will. They've gotten the support from a plethora of countries. He's talking about the Expo 2030. He thinks they're going to win it. Saudi Arabia will. Like Caribbean nations, Pacific Island nations, many Arab, Muslim, African, and some European nations. He then compliments Richard on his French pronunciation. Très bien, Richard. Well done. Thank you, Trimex, for that comment. I think he is Canadian, so he, is a sort of French pronunciation expert.
Yeah,
so there you go,
I guess
Richard.
he would know. So that's a nice lift for the day. Yeah, that was a good. And by the way, that's you produce these things, and so the segments come out. So that's the latest one, and you roll them out. In a perfect world, we slice and dice everything, but we have to grow a little bit to get to that perfect world. But you do a great job on that, and listeners and viewers should know that if you don't want the whole enchilada of an episode, segments, roll out over the course of the ensuing week.
Yeah, snacks if you don't want to sit down and have the full midday meal, which we understand. It's all good. We are just happy that you guys are here. Very well done, Richard. I love that. This comment from Omrand2 on YouTube. Good afternoon. There are Saudi female Uber drivers. Most of them filter to accept only requests from women. So that is a direct comment toward me explaining why I have not had yet any female Uber drivers in Riyadh, despite taking maybe 300 Ubers over the last year. So there you go. It's not that they're necessarily avoiding me. It's that they may just be filtering out all males. And
your
that's
gender.
Cool. Yeah.
That's useful info because I hadn't had a female driver either. That's useful info.
That's useful info. You can't do that in the United States or elsewhere, I assume. Right. So.
That's true. I know any Uber driver can or Lyft can accept any ride. They don't have to accept every ride. So they may filter it by gender too. I actually thought that all drivers in Saudi Arabia were Pakistani because I think we laughed last time because Uber drivers are limited to Saudis and at surge periods, there's a shortage of drivers. So you could, this, you've done this many times. You walk out, you call an Uber and there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually just flag down a taxi going by, and they're almost all Pakistani.
Yeah.
Obviously all men too. So that's why I get around Riyadh.
I've never flagged down a cab in Riyadh. Never. Yeah.
if you're stuck, you need to do it. I mean, if you like because of the surge times, and a lot of times you're over there during major, conferences and forums and that sort of thing. So there's you come out and there's 100 other people trying to get an Uber at the same moment.
Yeah, It's funny, Richard, you mentioned that because it's actually the Uber there is so good. And Saudis will say, well, if this isn't working, try, one of two or three other apps. Some have, cheaper cars, I guess. They have some sort of distinctive thing about them, but they're all rideshare apps. And I've never had to do that. The Ubers are always
Oh,
pretty
really?
easy to find, except for that one time
Yeah.
after the PIF forum where there was a huge rainstorm in Riyadh and I was just stranded. There was nothing I could do. And I tried all of those apps at that time as well, and none of them picked up. So maybe I should start building up some points or a rating, or so that they know I'm a known quantity over there. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah. And actually, there should be some sort of okay check mark if you're a reasonable male that a female will drive us. But yeah, and then, it's just so much. Back in the day, you'd have to hire a driver, just to get around. I mean, it was anyway. It's a lot easier now.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, this comment from Noof on WhatsApp, time for a haircut, Lucien. And when I got that, that was from the Kanta Ahmed segment and conversation, which Richard was actually truly fantastic. We really enjoyed that. If you haven't watched that or listened to that on the YouTube page, check out the audio version of it. She's brilliant, and that was a lot of fun. Noof, thank you. I think I'm going to let this thing ride for a bit. But yeah, well, there you go. So
Yeah,
we have all feedback, positive and negative.
it's summertime. You either go long or short.
That's right. I don't think it's that long, but I mean, I kind of like paid attention to it this week and gave it a little bit of extra muscle just to, make it look like maybe there was a haircut.
Yeah.
And Richard, one more from Abdul Rahman on that episode. Content Sabah Al Khair, good morning. The content episode is a home run. Good job, guys. Thank you, Abdul Rahman. It was a great episode, and we appreciate him listening and always helping us out. He's the man.
100%. Ditto. Double check mark, smiley face. Excellent on Abdul Rahman being the man.
Yep.
And yes, the content episode was terrific. It was really good.
She was brilliant. It was great. Richard, let's jump into it. Before we do, though, sorry, let's not jump into it yet. Please give us a rating and review. And do you have something to add to it?
No, I was poised. I'm on the ledge.
You were ready to jump, and I said, "Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second, please." So, please give us a rating and review us wherever you can, YouTube or on Apple podcasts, Spotify. We're getting a lot more listeners on Spotify. I guess that's more of a attractive platform now for podcasts. I don't really listen to any there, but for all of our Spotify listeners, what's up? Thanks for listening to us there. Yeah.
What's up?
What's up? Okay, there it is. Richard, what's your one big thing this week?
Congratulations to the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world on the occasion of Islamic New Year, which was observed in Saudi Arabia this Wednesday, July 19th. So yesterday, as we record in a week. In the Islamic or Hijri calendar, our July 19th is the first day of the month of Muharram in the Islamic year of 1445. So I thought it would be appropriate to do a one big thing on the Islamic calendar because and it's funny, Abdul Rahman, you mentioned him. I've always been impressed with how smoothly and easily our Muslim friends manage to balance two calendars. I have, on my watch here, I have the Muslim, day and date, and it's on my phone. But I never refer to it. It's just sort of there. So I have Muharram 2, 1445 for today. But, for someone in say, someone who is a Muslim, the operation is not so simple. I think they don't even think about it, but it's quite complex. So anyway, it's a shout out to Islamic New Year and a little info on the Hijri calendar. Unlike the Gregorian calendar, some of you may know this, so this may be very 101 elementary. The Gregorian calendar, which is based on the Earth's movement around the sun, basically a steady 365 days. The Hijri calendar is based on the moon. By the way, many ancient civilizations were based, their calendars were based on the moon. I mean, the Babylonians, the Jews, the Greeks, Egyptians, Aztecs, Incas, Hindus. So, that's sort of standard issue historically. but so the new moon, every new moon marks the beginning of each of the 12 lunar months, and a full year amounts to 354 or 355 days. So the Hijri calendar is essentially 10 or 11 days shorter than the Gregorian calendar. So the calendars don't align. For you and I, it doesn't matter. We go by the Gregorian. Also, year one in the Hijri calendar begins with the year 622 of the Common Era and the Gregorian calendar. So in that year, the Prophet Muhammad and the then existing Muslim community migrated from Mecca to Medina. So this hijra or migration, according to the Caliph Umar, who was the second caliph, I believe, and also Muhammad's father-in-law, quote, separated truth from falsehood. So let it become the epic of the era, unquote. So the Hijri year one is our 622. 2023, this year for us, is Hijri year 1445. But again, that to go back to the beginning, that's not what impresses me most. All of the Muslims' faith rituals are based on the Hijri calendar. So Ramadan, Hajj, the Eids, the Prophet's birth, etc., not only move through the lunar year, but also obviously don't align with the Gregorian calendar that governs, for almost all the Muslims we know, their professional lives. So you have this, construct where you've got when you're organizational. So, is Gregorian, but you're religious and family in many ways is Hijri. So this year, for example, Eid al-Adha, which occurred, which marks the end of the Hajj. It was observed starting on June 28th. It won't be on June 28th again for 30 years. I mean, all these important dates cycle through the year. You have to adapt. You have to change. They don't, the Gregorian calendar doesn't accommodate them. They just move through the year. So the corollary for us would be that our work and family was Gregorian, but all our religious observations, Easter, Lent, Advent, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever, were on a separate schedule that changed significantly each year. So I just think this is impressive. And I wanted to give a shout out to all our extraordinarily capable Muslim friends, especially in professional world, who are able to adapt and able to move, able to accommodate, their Gregorian life with their Hijri life. So again, on the occasion of Islamic New Year, I want to recognize all these incredibly competent Muslims. I know it looks easy. I don't think it's easy at all. I hope I haven't offended Muslims everywhere with this very basic overview, but again, on the occasion of Islamic New Year, here's a shout out to all you really, Muslims, keeping all this aligned and straight.
Yes. Happy New Year. That was a good one, Richard. I didn't know any of that. I also didn't know what your one big thing was this week in advance. So that was actually kind of cool. And as I asked you, I was like, because typically we talk a little bit about it and we just so that we kind of know what's going to happen. I didn't know. And I was like, what? It was a strange week. So I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going in. I don't know anything and actually learned a few things there, Richard. So that's really good. I just wanted to second the point that you made about how easily, how easy it seems to keep this straight for followers of Islam, these two calendars that are completely different. And yet it seems so natural that it's never like when you're talking to them, they're never sort of doing a calculation in front of you. It just sort of seems like it comes naturally. Like you said, I know it's not that easy. I can't even keep my own calendar straight, Richard. I have two. And I can't get those two straight. So, and that's just one type of calendar, the Gregorian calendar. So that is amazing, Richard. What's
the date of Easter next year, 2024?
I don't know. And Richard, we joked about this, right? July 4th it's July 4th. That's the date, but it's going to happen occasionally on a Tuesday. And you're like, well, this is no good. Christmas is always on the 25th. There's certain things that we know. And then there's some things like Easter changes and Thanksgiving. Does that change?
Yeah, it does.
26, right? Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's like something like the third Thursday in November, Thanksgiving, Easter, same thing, but it essentially moves by a day, and I always know Easter because it's near my birthday. But yeah, that's the example. I can't even keep track of that. Imagine trying to keep it on a religious holiday that jumps 10 or 11 days a year.
Yeah, and thank goodness for modern calendar apps, by the way, that have these things built into them so that it just says Easter, and you're like, oh, cool. And some of my calendars actually have some other things, and you can actually get these plugins where, like, you're like, oh, give me every Washington Capitals home game,
Right.
put into the calendar, which is delightful. But yes, shout out. That's awesome. But of course, Richard, then you kind of regret doing that. It's hard to unadd those things, and you're like, oh, I don't really care about this
It's
anymore.
as if my calendar is a friggin' mess.
I did that with Chelsea's games, and I was like, I'm not going to get to watch most of these games, but it's there.
It just makes you feel bad, right?
It does. Yeah, it does. Richard, that was a good one. And happy, it's Hijri, right? Hijri.
Yes, Hijri calendar. Yeah.
Yeah, Hijri calendar, New Year to the 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. We're sorry for insisting on the Gregorian calendar as we do. And there are other calendars as well, Richard, in the East. And yeah, it's just, for us, it's just one calendar. So we appreciate the fluidity there. Richard, my one big thing this week, we talked a little bit about weather. Weather is something that people just love to talk about in general. It's the first thing that you talk about when you enter an elevator with strangers or in a hotel. You're just like, oh yeah, it's warm outside. It's cool. Well,
but it's a dry heat.
It's a dry heat. I'm going to get to that in a second. I think there's a bit of a myth to the dry heat thing, but 3 continents right now are facing an enormous heat wave. In the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, it is especially hot. Just how hot, if you're reading the news about it, it's hot enough to test the limits of human survival. Some of the numbers coming in from the region are pure insanity, Richard.
Yes.
On July 16th, 2023, Persian Gulf International Airport in Iran reported a heat index of 152 degrees Fahrenheit, 66.7 degrees Celsius. Wow. At 12:30 p.m. By the way, that's another translation kind of 2 calendars thing, going from Fahrenheit to Celsius. We kind of casually use Fahrenheit. That's what we use in the US. Pretty much everywhere else uses Celsius. And that's just one of those things the US is going to be stubborn about. But I had to get my translator app, or the sort of Fahrenheit to Celsius, out to get some of these numbers out. In Riyadh this week, Richard, high temps are hovering around 115 degrees or so, which is about 46 degrees Celsius. This morning, Richard, and I just checked, the temperature had already reached 100 degrees or 37 degrees Celsius by 9 a.m. And that is just so hot. Richard, when I was in Riyadh in June, the temps were around 110 degrees during the day. They dipped down to about 90 degrees at night. Actually had a couple meals outside at night. Shout out to my boy Saad. And I was like, this is not a good idea. It's 90 degrees outside. And, because it is a dry heat, and then they have these fans that are ubiquitous in Saudi Arabia that blow mist on you, which kind of gets a little bit annoying when you're like, have, water on your like food menu or whatever, but it does keep you cool. It's weird. The dry heat, and there's a little bit of mist and some air kind of is cool at night, and no sunshine, obviously. So, it's doable at night there. It's getting down to about 90 degrees, a little bit more than that at night now in Riyadh still. So, I think what happens is people just sleep in a little later and spend a little bit more time awake at night, which is interesting. But Richard, the global heat wave is indeed a global story. Records are being set all around the world every day. In the first week of this month, Richard, which is July 2023, set a record as the hottest global temperature since at least 1979. That's when modern records really were beginning to be kept. Experts say that it could be the hottest in 125,000 years. If you factor in proxy records like free rings and ice cores, things like that. We don't obviously really know for sure, but the planet is warming, and it's not just dangerously high temperatures and their direct effect on humans. The higher temperatures globally will affect sea levels, as we all know. Ice melts from the North and South poles faster than scientists previously expected. The warmer oceans this year mean a potentially more active hurricane season, despite El Nino, which was actually kind of a cool deep dive. Basically, a lot of air from El Nino pushes hurricanes out, makes it difficult for them to form. But because the Atlantic is so warm this year, reports from Florida are that if you get into the ocean, it's like getting into a warm bath and not refreshing at all. We may have a more active Atlantic hurricane season. But especially important for the Middle East, Richard, the Middle East and the Arab region. This is something we've discussed on this podcast several times. Going back to our conversation with Jeffrey Beyer, who's a sort of a climate sustainability expert based out of Dubai, great conversation with him. The Middle East and the Arab region are already facing rising temperatures almost twice as quickly as the rest of the world. This is according to a landmark study by the Cyprus Institute's Climate and Atmosphere Research Center and the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry. If this trend continues, the average temperature in some areas will increase by 4 degrees by 2050. I think that's 4 degrees Celsius. The goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, as laid out in the Paris Climate Agreement, already seems pretty unachievable in the region, but we'll see. And Richard, recently, as we've talked about, the weather here on the 966, we can't avoid it. Everybody talks about the weather all the time. It's funny, once you notice that, you notice how much people talk about it. 2 weeks ago, Richard, 1.8 million Muslims battled through a days-long Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia in temperatures up to 48 degrees Celsius, which is about 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Thousands were treated for heat stress. Several died. Richard, in the GCC in Saudi Arabia, there are rules against, as you know, working during the hottest hours of the day. Increasingly, these areas are dependent on air conditioning more and more, but access to AC is not as widespread as it needs to be. Good time now, Richard, to give a shout out to Johnson Controls for doing the good work they do. Make sure you listen to our convo from a few weeks ago with CEO Mohammed Al-Sheikh. He was terrific. So what can be done? It's really hard to say, and that's sort of the mood that can be extracted from media reports now around the world, Richard, on this global challenge. But of the 5 countries in the world that have yet to ratify the Paris Agreement, 4 are in the Middle East, which is amazing. Iran, Libya, Yemen, and Iraq have all not signed the Paris Agreement. And it is in this hottest region of the world, Richard, the Middle East, that hosted the most recent UN climate change conference, more commonly referred to as COP27, and the next climate change conference, COP28, will be held in the UAE in Dubai on November 30th, 2023. Of course, Saudi Arabia is working on its own contribution to mitigating the efforts of climate change with the Saudi Green Initiative, which seeks to plant billions of trees and make its cities, which typically are hotter than average because of buildings and pavement, etc., make those cities more habitable in the summer with green spaces and ample shade. Another thing we've discussed recently on this podcast, Richard, the billions of trees that are going into Saudi Arabia and especially Riyadh, the Green Riyadh Initiative. And there's some memes going around showing the difference between similar streets around the world before and after trees, and when the temperature would have been the same, but the at street level temperature is much lower because you're not getting direct sunlight, and there's some sort of, there's shade and greater airflow because of these initiatives. So that stuff does work. But yeah, for sure, my one big thing this week is the big numbers on the thermostat around the world. Saudi Arabia and the wider Middle East are really experiencing some heat right now. For those of you who are in Kingdom right now, and many leave in the summer, please stay safe and stay cool, and send Richard or me via WhatsApp, LinkedIn, YouTube, or whatever, some thoughts on how you stay cool. If you have any tips that you do that seem to be unique to you. Richard, I know I've already gotten several screenshot weather apps from friends just showing exactly how hot it is. So reach out to us and let us know if you have any tricks or tips on staying cool, because it's hot out there. It's hot here, Richard, in the United States, but not quite Middle East level hot or Arizona desert hot. So anyway, stay cool, everybody.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a really good one, and timely too. I mean, it is dangerous, and we can, obviously there's some controversy of what we attribute it to, but we seem to be in a sort of a worst case scenario of a lot of things coming together, creating this heat dome. It seems to envelop the whole world. So what's on the not signatories to the Paris Agreement? Who's the 5th one? Is that you said Iran, Libya, Yemen, Iraq in the Middle East? You said there was another 5.
I don't know, but I would assume it's North Korea. I'm going to look it up right now.
I think that's a good one. That's a good one. Not none of these are big carbon emitters, but yeah, it is interesting. How they're going to remediate this and try and get ahead of it, because as you say, the temperatures all globally are going up, but they're ramping up quickly in the Middle East to unlivable levels, projected to be unlivable levels. And it is interesting too, always every summer, Saudi Arabia at least has to, their domestic usage of natural gas is, they have to redirect crude and natural gas to deal with the huge energy draw from AC.
Richard, I sorry for slandering our North Korean listeners and viewers. They did sign the Paris Agreement. It was Eritrea. It did not. So anyway, yeah.
That was my second guess. And
Yeah.
that's that's I'm sure does Eritrea emit any carbon at all?
No, and I think they have since signed it too, so it's super confusing. But yeah, that's really interesting. It just seems like the type of thing that North Korea would not sign because just
absolutely. I think that's a great guess. And there's so many scenarios where North Korea is the right guess.
Yep. Yep. So everybody stay cool. We will note though that Richard mentioned this earlier, the dry heat thing. It's funny because it does feel like not as hot. Like Richard, it was in the 90s here where we are, but with the humidity, in the 80% humidity range, you can do like 10 minutes outside before you're just drenched in sweat, and it's completely unbearable. I mean, it makes everything from gardening to golf totally unpleasant. And so, 90 degrees without humidity is a completely different ballgame. But that actually applies to the UAE, and Dubai gets really humid. And I think places on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea coast also get quite humid in the summer. So that, even though the temperatures are a little lower, it seems pretty steamy and warm there. So just be safe, everybody, and drink water. And get ready.
Absolutely. And you get the wet bulb temperature effect out there, where it's so hot and humid that your perspiring doesn't cool the body down.
Yep.
And that's when it gets, that's when it gets really dangerous. But yes, excellent one. Very good one.
Thank you. Yes, Richard, one last thing to add here. All of the stories coming out from Death Valley and the tourists that are going to see it or like try to experience the warmest weather. There was a guy that ran in the hottest day ever in Death Valley, ran a mile in a Darth Vader Star Wars suit, just I think to get media attention. He survived, but please don't do anything like that and stay inside. So, Richard, thank you. That's pretty interesting stuff. We, as we mentioned, do not have a guest this week. We are going to jump right into Yallah.
Saudi
in a minute. And Richard, you're going to kick this one off. But this is an interesting sort of tie into the previous, to my one big thing, which is cool. So, Yallah, fire away.
Are we in order? I'm trying to think how it's going to tie into you. All right. So what I have, Yallah number one, according to Regional Projects Tracker, MEAD projects, there were 83 billion worth of contract awards from January 1 to June 3rd. The best total for the first 6 months of a year since 2015. The $83 billion total is also a significant increase on the $47 billion of contract awards recorded during the first half of 2022, just last year. Saudi Arabia was the most active country for contract awards. During the first 6 months of the year, there were $42 billion of deals signed in the kingdom, the most on record. The previous high was $28 billion awarded during the first half of 2014.
Yeah, Richard, this is interesting. That's a high, an 8-year high for Saudi Arabia. In what is supposed to be kind of a weird economic year, 2023, they're just building. Second most active market was the UAE, 22 billion of awards. The pandemic obviously was a little bit weird during that. And it's interesting, Richard, we just talked about this, but those building these and working on these construction projects in this summer period cannot work. And do you know the timing? It's like 11 to 4 or something like that, where no one's allowed to work outside during the heat.
I think it might be 1 to 4, but yes, there's, and it wouldn't make sense to be 1 because it's blazing hot 11. So I think you're right.
Yeah. But this is interesting, Richard. I mean, this is, Saudi Arabia is building. That's the takeaway. They're building.
Yeah, and it is interesting that so this is, we're talking about comparing it to 2014, and some of so that was 2014. The total, the first half was 109 billion. So this is, and the comparable one, 2014, 2015. So basically that period was, you're coming off of 3 years of $100 oil. So you see all these major, investments and contracts, and everybody's getting business. and then it crashes and it goes down. I mean, at first half again in 2018 is 48, 47. Obviously during COVID, 39. So it's inching back up, and it's a reflection of the economy. It's a reflection on the investment on the part of the government. But yeah, everyone's making hay. I think it's interesting that the largest contracts weren't signed in Saudi. The largest one was a $10 billion contract in Qatar, um, for natural gas train. Second largest was a resort in Dubai, and the third was another ethane cracker in Qatar. So the Saudis are rolling up the biggest numbers, but not necessarily the largest awards, which is a good sign. He said, you're getting a lot of activity, not just one big hit.
Yep. Yep, interesting. Richard, Yallah number 2. Saudi Arabia agreed on Tuesday to buy Turkish drones in the biggest defense contract in Turkey's history as President Erdogan reaped the benefits of his diplomatic push to repair ties with Gulf powers and help Ankara's struggling economy. The agreement includes cooperation on technology transfer and joint production, quote, in order to advance the high technology development capability of the two countries, end quote. The two countries also inked several MOUs in sectors including energy, real estate, and direct investments. This was according to the SPA.
Yeah. So Erdogan's on a trip, Saudi, Qatar, UAE, rolling up contracts. He hopes he needs help with his economy. It's kind of a little enshrouded in mystery. So this deal is announced as the largest one ever signed for that. The Turkish Baykar is the company that makes them. But it doesn't give a number. I guess the largest ones that we know that's been announced was a $367 million deal with Kuwait. So presumably it's larger than that. And it's also interesting too, because from the American perspective, we're a little uneasy when the Saudis are getting defense technology from other countries, and like we don't, they've turned to the Chinese for drone technology. Wonder if we feel better, that they're turning to, a NATO member of NATO in Turkey.
I was going to say, I wonder if there's some sort of approbation process where Turkey, maybe runs this by the State Department or Defense Department or even the CIA and says, hey, we're going to sell Saudi Arabia, another, ally of yours, a bunch of drones. I mean, I wonder if that's done at all, or if I'm sure U.S. officials were expecting this to go down. But yeah, Richard, there's that famous photo of Erdogan signing one of the drones. I think it was 2020. Yeah. But it's weird because it doesn't look like a signature. It just looks like he's drawing on it, which is really funny. It wasn't really on my radar that the Turks were leaders in drone development and production. So cool.
This Bayraktar, yes, it's been game changing in a lot of ways for the region. And my guess is the Turks probably don't ask for permission. They may give a heads up, when they're selling arms to another country, especially one that's an ally of Saudi Arabia, partner of Saudi Arabia, partner of the U.S. So, but I don't know for sure, but they probably give it a heads up. But they signed a lot of other things, and it looks like there's supposed to be some manufacturing and technology transfer into the kingdom. So that's, from Saudi Arabia's perspective, that's really important.
Yeah, Richard, this was a sort of a healing tour for Erdogan. Relations really hit a low in 2017 after the Khashoggi murder, and the way Turkish officials sort of handled that, and the leaking of information to the press over and over and over again, it just seems like a 180-degree turnaround from that time. And it's interesting because, Erdogan just secured a re-election for another 5 years in that election there. So it's interesting, really an interesting time. He obviously went to Qatar as well. And then the Emir of Qatar went to Saudi Arabia the following day for a GCC meeting. So, diplomacy.
It's been breaking out for 18 months. The Turks really have to get back it's just too costly. Their economy is in too much trouble for them to be at odds with key neighbors like Saudi Arabia. And I know Erdogan is expecting big things from this trip and lots of investment.
Yeah. And Richard, a little bit of a mea culpa, by the way. It is July 20th. This will air really early morning, 8 a.m. Riyadh, 7 a.m. Riyadh, excuse me, on July 21st. We are how many years, how many months, 5 months into the Iran Saudi detente. And I said I wanted to go on the record saying I didn't really see it lasting up to the 3 month agreement period. And so, I was wrong. There you
Well,
go. Happens
conveniently,
occasionally.
your co-host doesn't remember anything. So if you had not
Good.
fessed up to
Yeah.
that, I would not have recalled it.
I could just start convincing you that I said something a little while ago, and you're like, "Yeah, you did. You were way ahead on that thing."
Well, it completely leaves me at a complete disadvantage with my wife, who remembers everything.
Of course, yes, as all
So
wives typically do. Yeah,
exactly. Yella, well, thank you for your integrity. Journalism integrity, ethics is important here.
indeed. It's a cornerstone of the 966. So,
Number three, Saudi Arabia was considered the 28th best country to live in as an expat, and the United States ranked 30th, according to the Expat Insider 2023. In February, a survey was sent to more than 12,000 expatriates living in 172 countries with an online questionnaire organized into 5 categories. Participants were asked to rate 56 factors in the categories of quality of life, ease of settling in, working abroad, personal finance, and expat essentials. Only countries with a sample size of at least 50 participants were considered.
that is shocking. You would think that expats would prefer living in the United States over Saudi Arabia. At least that would be like the thing that I would expect. But it was also interesting, Richard. Saudi Arabia was 4th in the MENA region. Bahrain was 1st. And then the UAE 2nd, Oman 3rd, and then Saudi Arabia ahead of Qatar as well. So that's interesting. And then Turkey was way back, 20 places behind Qatar. So I don't know how much these things really matter, Richard, but it does. Especially when you make a comparison between 2 countries, although it is a pretty fair poll, but it really shows mostly, it speaks more to Saudi Arabia than it does against the United States, in my opinion, that it's becoming more and more livable for expats. It's interesting.
Well, ultimately, you're going to go where the jobs are. There is a quality of life aspect. And in terms of comparison to Saudi and America, there may be Muslims who much prefer to be in Saudi and so on and so forth. Yeah, there's a lot of factors involved. I mean, the one constant, it seems to be, that Kuwait is always ranked last, and they've sort of developed a reputation over the years, decades, of just being inhospitable to expats and foreign labor. Which, that's been consistent. So we don't know. At the top of the list, by the way, globally, Mexico is top of the list, followed by Spain, then Panama.
Oh, Panama.
And
sweet.
as you mentioned, Bahrain was the only one to make the top 10 list, with UAE and Oman just outside of the top 10 at 11 and 12.
Yeah, Richard, you were right, by the way. Saudi Arabia earned lower scores in the categories of quality of life and ease of settling in, but excelled, including working abroad. So that's where the jobs are in Saudi Arabia, and I think that's reflected here. It is interesting.
But these are the kind of metrics that Saudi, under the Vision 2030, pay attention to. This is, they'll take this and say, all right, we're falling short in some areas. I hope they'll take this but it seems to be the habit where they're really trying to these benchmarks and metrics that are global in nature and repeatable. They like to climb up the standings, and so hopefully they'll take this and go, okay, where are we missing on this, and what can we do to make the experience more positive so we can attract the best talent available.
Oops, sorry, bad use of the mute button there, Richard. I will say that it does seem, this is one person's opinion, but it does seem that Saudi Arabia is much more livable now than it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago as an American. Obviously, this is expats all around the world, so not really speaking to Americans, but it seems more and more realistic that an American would take a job in Saudi Arabia now versus way before, when they didn't have some of the best restaurants in the world and Riyadh season and a really increasingly interesting Saudi Pro League and all these other things going on. So they are working on the quality of life situation. Visiting there, you just did recently as well. It's a lot more fun. So
You
And
know,
that's just the fun. That's just the non-work side of it.
I was having a discussion recently with someone and they were talking about we won't mention them. They were talking about um, the regional HQ process and internally convincing people to uh, relocate from the Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, to Riyadh. And the person was saying, a lot of the complaints, schools, things to do, don't really obtain anymore. This is their perspective. They said the biggest difference was alcohol, but all the other things that were mentioned, this person thought they were dated and out of, they weren't consistent with the current situation. And I just offer that, as an observation, as that somebody made to me who's actually in the mix.
Yeah. Richard, we did a segment on whether or not Saudi Arabia will allow alcohol eventually, soon, later. It's just interesting. It's like when, again, one person's opinion, but when you're there, I don't think about it at all. It's not like I miss it, or like, oh, I really wish this dinner had alcohol. It's just strange. So some say that it's coming, and some say it's coming imminently. I don't know if I see that. I just kind of, from talking to people, it doesn't seem like many people want that. I mean, I guess that's usually one of the first things that comes to mind when you say, "Oh, I'm going to move to Saudi Arabia, or I'm going to be there for 2 weeks." It's like, well, can you get a drink anywhere? And it's like, well, no, you can't. But it's interesting. So
That is
um,
that will be interesting. I mean, and we'll watch this and we'll track it certainly if anything breaks. There's a lot of mixed messaging in that. One, I think it'll be fascinating if they can ramp up these tourism numbers, adventure tourism, historical tourism, without alcohol. If the numbers are going up without this. The other thing is Sean Matthews, who writes for Middle East Eye, did an interesting piece on the yachting industry in Saudi Arabia and how they're really promoting the yachting scene on the Red Sea, and how, and it's a little bit of a dichotomy in the sense that the yachting scene really likes alcohol. That's part of the sort of culture. Uh, but and Sean Matthews was talking about this. When people showed up for the F1 in Jeddah and docked, their yacht came and did all the show and all the entertainment. There was plenty of alcohol to be had through various means and that sort of thing. It's not official, and certainly maybe that's not something that anybody wants to talk about. But I just say there's a little, I only offer this as everyone's trying to figure it out, what the practice is, what should be legislated, what should be policy, what's needed. And to go back to the beginning, I'll be fascinated if Saudi Arabia finds they can reach their 100 million tourists by 2030 mark that they have set as their goal without allowing alcohol. They may be able to do it.
yeah,
Because
go ahead, please.
sorry to interrupt. A lot of travelers like you and me will go, will enjoy it. Alcohol is not a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a big part of it at all, and I think people are aware of that it comes with serious consequences, and it comes with consequences in the United States. I mean, there's alcohol causes a lot of problems here, and we tried and succeeded in banning alcohol. It was a huge part of our culture. It was part of all the immigrants' culture that came in, almost all of them. And in the 20s, we banned alcohol, and we banned alcohol for a while. And part of the reason why it didn't, and it was popular, it was banned not because it was some authoritarian, legislating on others thing. It was enormously popular. The reason why it failed is because, a lot of the enforcement regimes were underfunded. There's a great documentary about it, one of my favorites of all time, from Ken Burns, on prohibition and just sort of how it fell apart. But there are a lot of people that understand that it comes with a lot of challenges. And if you introduce, like, for example, if Saudi Arabia were to say, hey, we're going to legalize alcohol tomorrow and it's going to be everywhere, this is a culture that does not drink for the most part. So, you'll get a lot of inexperienced drinkers. You'll have drinking and driving. There's a lot of problems that come with it. And so I think this is just an opinion, but I think that maybe it'll just be very hush hush. And if you want it, you can get it. I don't know. It's something that I think about all the time because it's really hard to see happening, but it also kind of seems like it's going to happen. So
yeah, yeah, there's a yes. I can't make a call on that. People will just presume it'll happen. Some people will say that maybe it'll be just in certain zones. For the longest time in the Emirates, you can only drink in hotels. Um, you know, the same thing that happened in Prohibition. I mean, it led to the criminal enterprises, which they're problematic in and of themselves. So I don't know. It'll be interesting, but you could certainly see a world where they can reach a significant goals in terms of tourism where alcohol is not part of it. You could also see a world where it's very constrained and constricted to things like Red Sea Islands or yachting resorts or Neom. Although that's that might they might have a huge population, at least as initial steps. And we always have to remember Saudi Arabia society is conservative. It remains conservative. It's not a big fan of alternative lifestyles, certainly doesn't like drug use. And this is, this is not a passing thing. People feel this very deeply. So, I think with anything like this, the government would be very careful in their choices.
yeah, fascinating topic, Richard. This was one of the longer Yellahs. This sort of opened up an interesting bunch of different avenues.
Let me add, and I'm going to go back to the same thing. I probably said the same. This would be the third time. I said way back when, and Lucien, we've been together for a long time, but I always said, the Saudis and actually any responsible government, if you're looking for a cultural or social change, it's the Saudis have tended to wait until there's an economic imperative that compels this change. A perfect example is women driving.
Yep.
You could have said, vast numbers of Saudi policymakers were just fine with this, but they needed the economic cover to put it out there as this is the new thing. We're doing this differently. Same thing, getting women in the workforce. This is, it's not a social or cultural assault or a modification of what we know and have known. It's an economic imperative. And so, maybe if tourism is struggling, or if they just can't get certain things off the ground, maybe they say, okay, we got to do alcohol, guys, because people aren't coming. That's sort of what I'm saying. If people are coming, that economic imperative isn't so great.
Yeah, I mean, you have been very consistent on that, and that's a good point because I don't know, like is there one right now? Not really. The tourism numbers are doing really well. The economy's doing really well. Development, we just talked about, the construction and new contracts, everything awarded, is fastest in the Middle East. It doesn't seem to be an imperative right now, although, if you want more F1s and a really good yachting scene like you get in Monaco, maybe, but I mean, that's not an easy sell.
And it may come down to an aspirational choice. I mean, the Crown Prince has said, our reference point is Miami. And being that, it's more than just a job, it's a quality of life, all the things that are available to you when you step out outside the office door in Miami, entertainment, activity, weather, this and all that, that's what we want to be able to offer. Maybe that, inevitably part and parcel of that is an opportunity to consume alcohol.
Yeah. And Richard, there have been experiments, maybe I mentioned this on a recent episode, but globally, Portugal legalized all drugs, and there was a feature-length piece in the New York Times a few weeks ago about how poorly that's going and how they're trying to roll that back because it just didn't really work out. I mean, the idea is okay that you don't want to make criminals out of people that have a addiction issue, but at the same time, it creates so many problems, and so it's just it's just a self-determination issue too, because what's good for us or what's good for Portugal or the UK isn't necessarily good for Saudi Arabia or China or anywhere else. So,
and there's always a danger, like Amsterdam. There's always a danger of liberalizing when others aren't, because all of a sudden you're going to attract, all the the characters and the profiles, and it'll be concentrated. So it's not like, those people that are really, really interested in drugs and that sort of thing are distributed throughout the world. They're all coming to Amsterdam, or they're
Yeah.
all coming to Portugal, and then it becomes a real problem. You see this in San Francisco when they're, homeless policies, which have been very generous places, it's just problematic.
Yep. Good one, Richard. That was like I just
Who
mentioned
knew?
that,
Who
that
knew?
thing really went. Yeah, I was
knew?
like, this is going to be one of the shortest episodes of all
was
time.
it?
And then it's just like, best country to live in versus the U.S. and it just a 15-minute segment. So, but that was really good, and I think that's really interesting. And I think it hits a lot of themes here. I mean, not just what we just talked about with alcohol, but just quality of life, jobs, like Saudi Arabia opening up, but also staying true to itself. So good one, Richard. And now I forget whose read it is.
I think it's you. I think it's you. Yeah.
Okay, it's me. All right. I hope we have the same list, Richard. We didn't really confab too
Japanese
closely.
premiere.
Yep, Japanese premiere.
Excellent.
The Japanese premiere. Yallah number 4. Fumio Kishida kicked off his Gulf tour over the weekend with a stop in Saudi Arabia. A total of 26 agreements in the fields of healthcare, clean energy, mining, digital innovation were announced during a Saudi-Japanese roundtable in Jeddah on Sunday, which was attended by Kishida and Saudi Minister of Investment Khalid Al-Faleh, among other officials. Kishida was later received by the kingdom's de facto leader, His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, where the two leaders agreed to showcase, quote, Saudi Arabia and Japan's leadership in clean energy projects and sustainable advanced materials, end quote.
When we included this, we had the Erdogan visit. So just this last week, you had the Prime Minister of Japan in, you had the President of Turkey in. They're hosting now the GCC East Asia Summit, and that's the stands, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, there's 5 of them. They're all in now in Riyadh. This is just interesting. And Tokyo, part of Tokyo's motivation here, Japan's motivation to ensure and reinforce and expand the relationship is because they're concerned about Saudi Arabia's growing relationship with China. It's just funny, these knock-on effects when you start broadening your horizons, and diplomatically you're more active and you're inclusive and this sort of thing. You have these secondary effects, like Japan coming and say, okay, look, you're our primary, we get 90% of our oil from GCC states, 40% from you guys, Saudi Arabia, in terms of total needs. But we want to make sure that's in shape. But, oh, by the way, we want to expand our partnership and move it beyond just oil and look at clean hydrogen, ammonia, recycled carbon flows, all the things, by the way, that you're really interested in. It's smart diplomacy, but it's triggered in part by Saudi Arabia's, growing relationship with China. So anyway, I guess it speaks to the advantages of engaging and building with everybody.
Yeah, Richard, there was a big Saudi-Japanese hangout in Riyadh in just after Christmas in 2022, and there were a bunch of agreements signed there. I think it's really interesting that Japan is heavily dependent on the Middle East and especially Saudi Arabia for oil and energy. In 2022, this is from the same article, I believe, 93% of Japan's total crude oil imports came from the Middle East, 42% of which came from Saudi Arabia. So there's a really strong Saudi-Japanese energy trade going on. And then you also have Saudi Arabia's PIF investing heavily in Japanese gaming and animation and different things like that. So they've sort of enjoyed a pretty strong and consistently strong relationship for a long time. So it's interesting. And I think you're exactly right about China. I mean, that's a great point.
Nice.
Tokyo rules, by the way. It's just one of the coolest cities in the world. It's so clean.
I have not gotten there.
Dude, you will love it. You will love it. I know you,
because I like order.
Yeah, you like order. You like things orderly. The trains are incredibly clean and on time, and everything makes sense. And yeah, you're gonna love it.
Yallah number 5. An official from Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has confirmed to Al Monitor that work has begun on a land bridge project connecting the country to Saudi Arabia, and that it will operate even if diplomatic ties between the two countries are not officially normalized. The planned land bridge route will facilitate the transfer of goods and trucks between the countries and is expected to facilitate trade for the entire region. It will also enable tourist movement. Ynet reported that the new land bridge could save up to 20% in shipping costs and speed up trade to up to 2 or 3 days from several weeks, citing a study conducted by the Israeli Foreign Ministry and the U.S. government.
This is interesting, Richard. It kind of goes to what President Biden said in that interview with Fareed Zakaria. We talked a little bit about it last week. There's sort of relations are already warming in the background here. So there isn't like a big dam that's holding a big flood of relations from erupting. So you kind of see this stuff moving forward. Things like this make me think that there probably won't be some big grand announcement soon, but you never know. But I didn't know that Israeli tourists could visit Saudi Arabia directly. I guess I was wrong about that, but that's what this clearly says.
I agree with you. I think you're spot on. There's a rapprochement and intertwining of economic and commercial interests, ongoing. And this is, there's the I two, you two, so India and Israel too, and the United States and UAE sort of compact this group, and it has its purposes. But they recently, suggested a rail link, a tracks for regional peace, just a massive infrastructure project. Part of it came after the agreement that that was signed between Iran and Saudi Arabia and China, and so as a response, we have to be proactive. We have to counteract the Belt and Road Initiative. So it seemed a little hurried and rushed together. This seems more organic and more pragmatic and more within the bounds of what's doable to move the ball forward.
Yep, absolutely, and good for Saudi Arabia for sort of. It's something that you can really take stock of over 6 months since really the beginning of the year. But this whole pivot, the foreign policy pivot, this has kind of been ongoing for a while. But gosh, just a totally different mindset, and everything's in motion. So,
well, cool. And the nice thing is it's just common discussion. It's just a discussion. It's just, what's out this advanced business. If you want to talk about normalization, that's a separate thing. But hey, look, there's some opportunities here, and we could use your technology and some other things. So why don't we make this happen?
Yep. Richard, Yallah number 6. A shorter episode this week, Richard, but it's been fun. It always is. We get to the 6th one, and I'm like, oh, 6th one. Another couple more. Saudi Arabia was announced as the host of the 2027 Pan-Arab Games at the conclusion of this year's multi-sport event in Algeria. The Arab world's most prestigious sporting event, the Pan-Arab Games, returned to Algeria after a 12-year hiatus. The Games featured athletes from 22 Arab nations. The 2027 Games will be the first time Saudi Arabia has staged the event, which was inaugurated in 1953.
This is pretty cool. We talk about this all the time. Saudi Arabia obviously is into sports and promoting sports and participation in sports at home. They're also they're convening like crazy and getting, securing hosting duties for all sorts of stuff. 2027, they have the Asian Cup. When do they have the Asian Winter Games when Trojena has to be done? Is that 2029?
2029, yeah.
Obviously, put their hat in for the FIFA World Cup, either 2030 or 2034. They obviously put their hat in for the World Expo 2030. It's pretty cool. And this Pan-Arab Games is kind of neat. This is, as said, it's basically the Arab world's most prestigious sporting event, and it's never been held in Saudi. They've had this year, I think, was the 13th iteration of it, the one in Algeria. You didn't have women until 1985, but anyway, it's very cool, and again, Saudi Arabia is trying to be, front and center at anything, almost anything that they think is meaningful, both in terms of expanding their brand, telling their narrative, and promoting, priorities at home. Yeah,
I'm glad you said priorities at home, Richard, because we've really been talking a lot about sports and sports washing. The conversation with Simon Chadwick was sort of the peak for us. It was so awesome. And, he's quoted pretty much every day in a newspaper around the world about the story and what's going on. So it was really cool to have him on the 966. And even if you think that is the main goal of what Saudi Arabia is doing, is to somehow use sports to clean up its image, the other reality is that they also need a healthier population. If you look at how they did in these games, it wasn't great.
No.
So they're working on, becoming a more athletic nation that can compete in these games, in the Olympic Games and other games. Placed 10th in the overall standings at the Pan Arab Games. So, it's got a lot of ground to make up, and it wants its population to be more athletic. Saudi Arabia's success came in karate. They topped the medal table with 2 golds, picked up 2 golds in weightlifting and table tennis, according to this story. But, they want to be more, they want to be a more athletic nation. It's just a fact. So, I mean, that's part of that. And then, not a lot of people in the West watch the Pan Arab Games. So how does that fit into what is going on here? So just, it's interesting. And Richard, you and I are super on top of this. So
those are good
interesting
points.
Yeah. So thank you. It happens once or twice an episode. And the rest is the rest I just lie about 6 months later. I'm like, remember when I made that point?
You've been in fuego today.
Well, thank you. Give me talking about the hot weather and I will become in fuego.
And alcohol.
And alcohol and yachting. Yeah, yachting.
Yeah, these are all summertime activities.
And how bad I am at keeping a calendar, which is also not great. Richard, speaking of calendars, we will be back, of course, next week and every week going forward with really some good guests coming up. So this was a little bit of a breather for us. And we just have some really awesome voices joining us soon. So we're really excited to share those with our listeners and viewers. And we always say this, but thank you guys for listening and watching us. It keeps us going because it's so cool to see more and more people watching, listening, and then commenting to us, which we really like. So please keep that up. And thank you to all of y'all.
I just echo that 100%. Thank you. I'm consistently amazed and delighted and grateful that people are tuning in and more people are tuning in. It's really a surprise, and it's really nice.
Yeah, it is a surprise, Richard, because we really started this thinking that we would just get the content out there because we thought it was valuable, and too valuable to have talks like this and not have other people listen to it if they think it's interesting. And so it's kind of cool to see that. And it really is great too, because people express interest in the newsletter that we produce, which grows as well. So it's kind of feeding off of each other, and it's nice. So, go us. And thank you guys.
Well, it's almost like we knew what we were doing.
Yeah, almost. We could have fooled some people on that front. So, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you. Awesome.
Awesome stuff. Stay cool, everybody.